Welcome to Ask Away, the podcast of the American School Counselor Association. I'm Richard Wong, the Executive Director of the American School Counselor Association, and today I'm hanging out with General Russell Honore, who had a 37-year career in the Army that included being the leader of the military response to Hurricane Katrina in the Gulf Coast. Welcome, General Honore.
Well, hello, Richard. It's good to be with you. It's good to be with the American Association of School Counselors.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. Well, General Honore, you've been leading hurricane planning and response for the Department of Defense since 1999. How did you happen into this role?
Well, it came with one of the jobs I had working in the Joint Chiefs of Staff, for the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And in that particular year, we had several hurricanes hit the east coast of the United States, as well as one went into Venezuela and one went into Mozambique, which was just a big flood in Africa. And from that experience, dealing with it from the national level and going back and forth to places like the White House and dealing with the State Department on our international response, as well as dealing with FEMA inside of Washington on our national response, it gave me a little bit I know at that time, the experience I would need to be able to deal with Katrina in 2005.
Mm-hmm. Most of us probably don't think of the Department of Defense as having a role in hurricane response. What exactly does the Department of Defense do in a situation like that?
Well, believe it or not, the number one role of the Department of Defense is to protect the citizens of the United States. Sometimes people forget that, but that's why the Army was formed, to protect the people of the United States. And when we swear our allegiance in our oath of office, it's against all enemies, foreign and domestic, to include responding to civil requirements inside the United States of America. So it's a natural part of our mission and part of the history of the Army to respond when there's need to save our citizens' lives.
Mm-hmm. Well, your response to Hurricane Katrina was probably the highest profile mission you've had. What are some of the things that you remember from that experience?
Well, I think it was a reminder that on any given day, Mother Nature can destroy anything built by man. When you looked at the city of New Orleans, city of nearly 500,000 people, where 80% of it was underwater from flooding, a lot of destruction on the coast of Mississippi, where when the hurricane came ashore, it brought surge water in that lifted buildings up, 4 or 5 story buildings, and put them across the road. The absolute power of Mother Nature, that it can overwhelm and it can break anything built by man. And it's a reminder that we must always be prepared. And I think the thing it reminded me of is the disproportionate impact of disasters on the vulnerable population, the elderly, the disabled, and the poor. That when you have a disaster like a Katrina, the majority of people that's going to die will come from that vulnerable population.
Mm-hmm. And there must have been a lot of challenges for you to address the damage done by nature and keeping the needs of that population in mind.
Absolutely. You know, Richard, the number one priority during a disaster response is to saving people's lives. But even as you saw, and people may have seen Katrina, all witnessed it themselves or survived Katrinas, because there are a lot of people in the profession from teaching and that were themselves survivors of Katrina, that when 80% of a city flood and then the first responders themselves become victims, it has a major impact. Because if the first responders can't do their job, if the schools, you know, we use a lot of schools as shelters. We use schools to assemble people and to help people, to issue out food and water. But when those schools are under water, it creates a catastrophic event it's hard to describe. And then on top of that, when you have no electricity and you have no drinking water, when we lose electricity, it sets back the way we live 100 years without electricity.
Mhm.
So
So
those are the big reminders to me of what I saw on the ground at Katrina that will always, I will always remember.
So how did you deal with all those? It seems like just an insurmountable number of obstacles to that you had to face to provide for the needs of the hurricane survivors.
Yes, sir. It is, and you're never good enough to get it totally right. You do the best you can, and you try and keep as many people as you can alive. But in a true disaster like a Katrina, there's no such thing as being in charge of or having everything under control. There's no such thing. If you were able to do that, you didn't have a disaster, you had an inconvenience. Because a disaster by its means you have lost control to take care of yourself and your family, as well as for local governments to take care of their citizens. And Katrina created that condition. And to many people in America, it came as a surprise that we could be in a position in America where people were affected by a storm and help wasn't immediately there. But in this case, as I said, 80% of the city was flooded, the roads were underwater, and the airports were closed. So that is definitely a disaster that required every amount of logistics we could put together in the days following the Katrina to be able to do the evacuation, do the search and rescue, as well as to do life-saving tasks.
Mm-hmm. Well, you coordinated planning and response for some of the strongest hurricanes to hit the U.S., including Katrina, as we've been talking about, and Rita, and some others. But you've also led response to other tragedies as well, such as the Space Shuttle Columbia and even the D.C. Sniper shootings.
Absolutely. In both of those, the jobs I was in at the time required us to lead the military response in terms of planning and ensuring we've got the right assets and the right Department of Defense capabilities to, in the case of the space shuttle tragedy, to do everything from positioning satellites to put reconnaissance aircraft as well as moving troops into the area to go try and find the remains of the spacecraft. Mm-hmm. And in the DC sniper situation, we worked that, inside the United States, we are prohibited from using our military assets for the purpose of law enforcement. In this case, we did use, by direction of the president, some military equipment, but we had law enforcement officers inside those aircraft as we were using their capabilities to try and find the DC sniper.
Mm-hmm. Well, both of those must have been different experiences from your hurricane experience.
Absolutely. Those were more from a position of doing this from behind a computer and staying on the telephones and doing teleconferences, where Katrina was on the ground, boots on the ground, looking at people in the face and convincing them that we want to do our best to save their lives and to evacuate.
Mm-hmm. And General, what are some of the things you've learned from preparation and response to these crises that we can apply to our everyday lives?
Well, number one, to take into account that regardless of where you live, that Mother Nature can create a disaster in your neighborhood. We're all vulnerable, whether it's the drought, flooding, tornadoes, earthquakes, volcanoes, or even man-made disasters, such as war or the results of war or terrorist attack. And we need to be prepared in our homes to be our own first responder, take care of our family and our friends. And then when we've done that in a disaster strike, to help take care of our neighbors, particularly those that have unique disabilities and cannot move out of their homes to try and take care of them.
Well, in your most recent book, Leadership in the New Normal, what exactly is the new normal?
I think it's a definition of a time that we live in. that we go through great changes if you look at history over time. And in our own lifetime, most of us, we witnessed going from the industrial age to the information age, if I may use that as a broad step. And we saw ourselves from sitting down typing on typewriters that were manual when I started typing, to electronic typewriters, to computers, now to handheld devices like this. What I can do with this computer far exceed what I could do when I was a brigadier general in the Army with a whole battalion of communications people. I can do with this computer now. I mean, it was just a quantum leap. The new normal for us in this century, I think, is dealing with the aftermath of going from 5.8 to 7 billion people in the last 15 years. And then as we prepare to live out the 21st century, going from 7 to 10 billion people. When you consider of the 7 billion people in the world today, 2 billion don't have clean water in their homes. Nearly 2 billion don't have electricity or power in their homes. And 2.5 billion live on less than $4 a day. This new normal, I believe, is further defined by water. We have less clean water today than we had yesterday. We have less clean water today than we had today, and we're going to have less clean water tomorrow than we got today. That it will require us to create and to raise a generation of young people who will be willing to take on the impossible. Things that we sat around today that said, well, you can't do that. To go from 7 to 10 billion people, they're going to have to figure out issues. They will not have to deal with a world war, the students who are teaching now, but they will have to deal with a world with less water. They will have to deal with a world with more people and less water. And one of the answers could be is how we clean water. How do we clean the water in the ocean? The first thing is to stop dirtying it with plastics and things like that. But the students we're training today, I think they're going to have to figure out how they're going to clean the ocean. Because if we don't clean the ocean water, it's going to affect the seafood, which get into the life cycle of humans. They're going to have to figure out how to create maybe a box twice the size of this that you plug into your house, and if you lose power, it runs the house for 3 weeks. And when I go out, Richard, and I talk to engineering students in college, and I tell them that, they tell me, well, Gerald, that's impossible. And my response to them is, it's impossible because it hadn't been done yet. But you got to do it. Because, again, I don't think you're going to have to deal with world war, but you have to deal with expanding global population that will have to clean up some of the mess we created the last 50 years in the water, how we've dirtied it, and how we've destroyed many of our aquifers. But you're going to also be able to have to do things like teach a computer how to taste and smell. And again, when I tell the engineering students that in college, they tell me, well, Joe, you don't understand how a computer works. Computers X's and O's, it can't smell. And again, my response to them, only because it hadn't been done yet. The one that does it will be forever rich, but you're going to also solve two problems. You're going to solve a big problem with food security, because we'll be able to put that computer over our food and tell us if it's safe or not, or even what's in it, possibly one day. But this is not an option. This expanding global population is going to create challenges. But as the Chinese said, the word challenge also means opportunity. The word disaster also creates opportunity in their language. So I think it's the attitude that to every generation lies a great crisis. Problems we've got to figure out. I think this is one of them. The last century could be defined by what? Almost 3 wars, if you added them all together. 2 world wars and 2 other significant wars that basically divided the world for the better part of the last century. I think this century will be defined as how we prepare ourselves going from 7 to 10 billion people.
As you mentioned earlier, community seems to be a very important theme in your life, helping our neighbors and working together as a global society to address the problems of water and food shortage.
Absolutely. The water and food security is very significant. Even when you look today, in the world, we lose over 500 children a day, infants a day, because of bad food and bad water. That's a day, every day we get up. So that is concerning. But it's also concerning inside our neighborhoods here in America, where we got young kids that have food security issues, which create learning issues, which set them behind, which cause them, by the time they get to the 4th grade, or by the time they're 10 years old and they are not reading at 4th grade level, that they become disengaged in school. And that information is there. We've got to understand there's a direct relationship to how well these kids live at home to what their learning ability is when they get to school.
Well, that's a good point, General. You, since you retired from the Army, your mission has been to build a culture of preparedness. How can educational leaders help develop that culture of preparedness in schools?
Oh, the school system, I think it's very easy, and educators for years have used this technique of immersion. It's very easy for an English teacher to say, hey, I want you to write me a paper about hurricane preparedness. I want it to be this long. I want you to cover these 5 points. And just by doing that, that student has to do some research work. And at the end of the day, that student intuitively is going to walk away with some knowledge. I can remember my teachers wanting us to talk about communication and reasoning, but I remember they always wanted us to write about what was Shakespeare saying. That's a way to try and get us to communicate what was meant by that. I think there's so much that students can learn about the idea of being prepared and preparedness by integrating it into our learning. A science project could be to prepare a emergency go kit or preparedness survival kit for 3 people. And what would you put in that survival kit? So there are many ways educators can integrate this culture of preparedness when we are educating our students. And it's done in the indirect way, but very much similar to if it was a direct course. Because we understand that that curriculum is very tight, time is tight, these kids are busy. Some of them, they're competing for college scholarships or the extracurricular activities. I mean, they're going all the time. So I think a way that I've been around the many schools since I left the Army, and the curriculum is full. But I have seen in some cases where they have taken certain tasks about preparedness and integrated it into the school curriculum as a to-do task, or to write about it, or to talk about it, or to focus on it during Hurricane Preparedness Week or during Flood Preparedness Week. They have the students participate in some type of response.
Mm-hmm. And beyond preparedness, you have been very concerned about education, specifically in terms of equity and access to a high quality education for all students.
Absolutely. After Katrina, I had a lot of people wanted to talk about the impact of poverty. And I'd be drawn into these conversations, and one of them was the Children's Defense Fund, who spent a lot of time studying the plight of children in America. And I attended a couple of their conferences, and I got to look at some of the data they were projecting. And one piece of data, and I put it in my book, Leadership in a New Normal, that I'll always remember. And we went back and did the research test on it to make sure the quote was accurate. But their numbers show that, again, if particularly our poor children and at-risk young minority men, if they're not reading at 4th grade level by the time they're 10 years old, there are some cities in America that were counting how many prisons they would need in 20 years, just by counting the number of young men not reading at 4th grade level. And I've shared that with educators, and some of them have threatened to walk out of my presentation, and then they've gone and looked it up, that I didn't make it up. The Children's Defense Fund also will show you that those young men, particularly, that are not reading at grade level by the time they're 4th grade or 10 years old, have a large percentage of them will have a run-in with the law by the time they're 15 years old. And it's almost like 40%, because they become disengaged in school. And if they are there, they're disengaged. So there's a direct relationship. If we know that, we got to do something about that. I think that is the obligation, and one of the challenges of the new normal is how we're going to deal with that collectively as a community and as a society, that these underserved children don't get left behind.
And one of the things you did was to start the Honore Center for Undergraduate Student Achievement.
Absolutely, Richard. And one of them we're very proud of, under the supervision, the idea came to us from the president of Southern University, Dr. Mason, who created the idea of breaking the cradle of prison pipeline, as he called it. I don't speak to our young men about that, but that's where the idea was born, breaking the cradle of prison pipeline, a term that has been thrown around a lot in recent years in articles and in some books. Our approach was not quite as ambitious as that, in that what we started was a program with my name on it as a local person that's known inside the state of Louisiana, that's recognized in and around the city of New Orleans, and that's where we run the Honore Center for Student Achievement at Southern University of New Orleans. And what we recruited the first year was 20 young men of color, African Americans, who came from challenged schools and challenged families, at-risk young men who committed themselves. They wanted to go to college, but they didn't have two things. They didn't have the grades, and they didn't have the ACT scores to qualify them for college assistance, or in some cases for even admitting to some of the local colleges. So we found 20 of them. We got 17 to the freshman orientation class, and we started with 15 of them. And the biggest thing was that they had it in their heart they wanted to go to school. We had some pre-qualification standards, no drugs or police records, no babies, and you were going to move on to campus, and we're going to cohort you into a regimented dormitory lifestyle. And with that, we brought along a coach that with experience in teaching athletics and dealing with young men. We brought along a chaplain, a part-time chaplain, and we brought along a director. And we cohorted those young men in one place. We had them commit and take an oath of a loyalty, discipline, honor, and take on an honor code of sort that they were not only responsible for themselves, but they were responsible for their buddy. In that, if they saw a buddy breaking the rules or stepping out, that they were equally responsible to report. And I'm proud to say we have about 15 young men in the course right now. But from the day we started 4 years ago, we have 82% retention in college. So over time, they stay with us for a year and a half or two, then they move on. But you gotta remember, when these young men came to us, they were not eligible for college. We put them in a junior college program. We put them in a study hall every day. We put them in a controlled environment. We provide a stipend to them so they wouldn't have to worry about work. And we keep them in school 12 months out of the year. They don't get to go home for 2 or 3 months in the summer. We enroll them in summer school, and we help them provide part-time work so they can do some of the things they want to be able to get for themselves, have a little mental break, but still maintain their academic standing.
And is that first cohort about to graduate this coming May?
Yeah, we have a couple that are going to come up for graduation.
That's true.
They're no longer in the program, but believe it or not, they still come by almost daily, some of them, to check in, and they're no longer in the program. And some of them help us coach the freshmen that we bring in. Again, our challenge has been money and resources to maintain the school, but what we're trying to show folks is a proportion of those young men, if they were not in college, they could very well end up in the criminal system. That it costs us between $12,000 and $15,000 a year to keep them on campus and keep them in college. But yet it costs about $62,000 a year, with a lot of other bad things happening if we have to keep somebody in prison. And a reminder that the difference between charcoal and diamond is heat and pressure. If we put a little heat, put a little pressure, and put a little collaborative work together, we could create a program that can help these young men who are good kids at heart. They just didn't have the support at home, or they didn't have to go to a good school, or for many reasons of challenge inside their family. I can remember one young man, the first night we brought him in 4 years ago, we showed him his room and he started crying. And the director asked him what was wrong. He said, well, this is the first time in his life he had ever had a bed by himself. Wow. This is the 21st century in America. His dad died in prison when he was 2 years old. And at the time we took him into college, his mom was in prison. He was being raised by his grandmother. These are the type of young men that if we don't help them, it's very easy for them to end up in the wrong system. We want them in the education system and not in the criminal system. And if we want to do something about it, we need to start and make sure these kids get good pre-K and even change how they're raised at the infant level. Because if they're not held properly or taken care of when they go into pre-K, the problems start. And I'm convinced that if we can get pre-K through 12th grade right, if you can't afford that, get pre-K through 8th grade right, and everything will be just fine with education in America.
Hmm. And you've continued to, do you have about 15 students in each cohort?
Yes, sir. We still have 15 active, and the remainder of them are in college, but they're out of the Honore program. They were ready to move on to their own. It's a pretty restrictive program, as you can tell, with curfew and no smoking. No, we even do periodic urine tests to make sure that we don't have anybody using marijuana.
Uh-huh. And one of the most intriguing requirements that I find is that you ask them to make a 2-year commitment to teach it in an inner city school when they graduate?
That is correct. That's the requirement. That is a requirement. You know, in the state of Louisiana, if you have a 2.5 grade point average, you can enroll in college and not have to pay for it. And if you graduate, you owe the state nothing. On these young men, they are very challenged economically and many other ways they have been challenged. But we are asking them, we're going to give you a free education, but you've got to pay back, and that payback is 2 years of teaching in a challenged school somewhere in your community.
Hmm. That's interesting that you would make that a requirement. I mean, coming from a 37-year Army veteran, a general, why did you think it was more important to teach in a challenging school than, say, to go into the Army?
Well, a lot of our challenge schools here in South Louisiana are absent. There's an absence in our elementary school, and that's black male teachers. They're almost non-existent. And the numbers still don't look good. And we think that's a part of a balanced education. And many of these young men grew up in families where the father is not home anyhow in the challenge school. So to have a male teacher influence at school, we propose, we think, I don't have any scientific data on that, but this perception to me and from my own experience, that was very important when I went to school.
Yes, well, it'll be interesting to see the future of the program and the effects that it has. I hope as it matures, you will be able to collect some data on those students and the students that they touch.
You know, Richard, I mean, we're learning as we go. You know, we kind of building this, like building the airplane while you're flying it. It's one thing to sit back and write papers about, it's another thing to do it.
Right. Well,
we're creating a hypothesis and we're working toward a conclusion, and we're doing it with real living young men. You understand? They go through all the dramas and the dynamics. Well, you know, you deal with them all the time and all the things that they go through and challenges they go through. So it's certainly not perfect, but the fact that the percentage that are still in college is impressive. And I think maybe one of the gestures we need to make is make it a 2-year program. Mm-hmm. And, you know, graduate them with their associate's degree and let them go on their own the last 2 years, because that's quite a sacrifice to do that for 4 years.
Yes. Well, I'm sure even at the way it is now, it's making a huge difference to those students. And in general, for many years, you've shown us how to do it, whether it's leading through response to a crisis like a hurricane, or trying to change society through education and giving young adult males the educational opportunity they never had. I think you're really showing us how to tackle things that might seem impossible, and just do it and make a difference.
Well, and that's the intent. And there's so much to be done, and there's so many challenges out there that we try hard to stay focused on these young men and make sure we give them the best opportunity we can. At the same time, working in our greater community to create that culture of preparedness.
Mm-hmm. Well, those are great lessons for all of us, and we thank you for showing us those lessons, and thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today.
And good luck in all what you do to help influence the young people in this world. The new normal is going to be tough, but it's not bad as it was the last century. You know, 100 years ago almost, We were on the eve of World War One, where the trains lined up in the community to take young men off to war. This generation don't have to worry about that, but there will be challenges they will have to face. And thank you very much for allowing me to share some of these ideas with you today.
Yes, well, we really appreciate it. We appreciate your taking the time with us today to share your thoughts about the new normal. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. If you'd like to view this Hangout again, or if you'd like to view any of our other ASCA Hangouts, please go to schoolcounselor.org/hangouts. And until next time, please remember, life is a journey. Enjoy the ride.
Thanks, Richard.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Honore. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
That was great. That was really interesting. It was almost a perfect length of time, and there were a lot of other things I wanted to pursue, but I knew that well, we were starting to run out of time. So I'm sure you'll talk about those at the conference. And
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Great. Well, again, thank you so much for taking the time to do this for us, and I'm looking forward to meeting you in person.
I think we come up in the spring is when we're doing this, right?
Summer, July.
Yeah, well, that'd be good.
So.